So thankful today that we get to continue in this series on promises, which I believe over the course of the summer will be a great encouragement to all of us. We all need the promises of God. We all need to be reminded of the promises of God. Today, I'm willing to work through my allergies. If you're willing to listen through my allergies, hopefully we'll reach the end. Earlier in the week, I think Denise thoroughly enjoyed me having no voice at all. But thank God and Allegra, it's coming back. And hopefully we'll be able today to share what I'm confident God has placed on my heart. The promise given to Paul by Jesus in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 9, is completely foreign to us. My power is made perfect in your weakness. That is a message we never encounter, never, unless we happen to encounter the Bible. Because we live in a culture that celebrates strength, beauty, wealth, and fame, who celebrates those who seem to achieve satisfaction, self-sufficiency, success. We're surrounded by this reality. As a matter of fact, you can't live in America and look, listen, or read and not encounter the celebration of the accomplished or the exceptional. It's so normal to us that we know it, but we really don't notice it. We even play our part in this national drama as the most celebrity-obsessed nation on the face of the planet. We give these people our time, our money, our support, our praise. We completely overlook their messaging. We overlook the lack of their values. We're willing to look past all of that. So much gets excused under the banner of celebrity because we are celebrity obsessed. This is the way our society functions. The wealthiest people always have a seat at the table of national influence. Their voices carry the greatest amount of weight. Their opinions are regarded as important. Their insights are sought out, and the attention that they command in this culture is endless. All of us, to some degree, live in their shadow, whether we want to or not. The beautiful, the handsome grace the covers of our magazines. They stand at the center of our theater screens. The most talented, they occupy the space under the bright lights in the center of our largest stages, while the masses raise their hands to them, shed tears, and even chant their names. The most talented, gifted athletes are treated like celebrities. They receive multi-million-dollar contracts, own the best cars, buy the biggest houses, and are worshiped like gods by their devoted fans. These are the people our culture admires. It's provable. Their social media accounts have the most followers. Their videos get the most views. Their names are constantly promoted. And the rest of the population looks on as they are adored. A lot of people even envy them to the point that they do everything just short of selling their souls to be like them. People are willing to embarrass themselves in the pursuit of fame. They're willing to do whatever's necessary to command a view, a social media affirmation. Why are we this culture? Why have we gone from being a culture where young people would aspire to be doctors, nurses, lawyers, tradesmen, tradeswomen? Why have we gone from that to a culture where now, when even our elementary and middle school kids are interviewed, the great majority of them say they want to be famous? This is the culture we are. We admire and we aspire to be the wealthy, the powerful, the strong, the admired. Sadly, that even includes the Christian community. We've even created Christian church celebrity and pastors who grow wealthy at the expense of God's people collapse and fall, and people see how great the fall is, but then we repeat the cycle again. We're a broken culture. By the way, anything that ever takes the attention off of Jesus as the center focus of the church is wrong, regardless of who that is or what that is. But this is our American culture. We admire the strong. But what Jesus said to Paul was radically different than that. Could not be more opposite of that. And so really, when we hear this statement, I'm not even really confident that we have a context for it. My power is made perfect in weakness. Wait a minute, that can't be right. Surely his power will be made perfect in my education, in my abilities, in my wealth, in my talents, in the things that I can bring to the table to offer him. My power, Jesus said, is made perfect in your weakness. By the way, that proves once again that the message of Jesus is and always has been completely countercultural. You remember in Luke chapter 6, verse 38, Jesus said the way to receive is to give. Mark chapter 16, verse 25, the way to save your life is to lose it. Matthew chapter 5, verse 4, the way to be comforted is to mourn. This is the messaging of Jesus, and the way to be strong, to know true strength, is to embrace true weakness. And that doesn't make sense to an American mind. It doesn't. Think about the messaging we've heard even in the church. We're supposed to be Moses, standing strong as God parts the waters of anything and everything that is opposing us as we walk through the parted waters unharmed and unafraid. We're supposed to be David, whirling the slingshot of our faith so that we can destroy the giant that stands against our life. We're supposed to be Joshua, shouting victorious over the crumbled walls of our Jericho, the walls that have stood between us and our blessing. This is the messaging of the church, and it's completely false. We aren't David. We aren't Moses. We aren't Joshua. Victory is not earned by us. Victory is not won by us. It always has been, and it always will be God. It was never us. It was always God. It's God who's strong. That's still true. It's God who is strong. And we are not more than conquerors if you remove through him who loved us. And that's the truth that Paul declares. Jesus doesn't need our strength. We need his grace. Can I repeat that one more time? You guys here this morning? I hope so. God doesn't need our strength. We need his grace. And his grace is so great that it allows us to experience a Christ-empowered strength even in our weakness. That was Paul's confession. 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 7. So to keep me from becoming conceited, that's always a detriment. So to keep me from becoming conceited, because of the surpassing greatness of the revelations, a thorn was given to me in the flesh, a messenger of Satan to harass me, to keep me from becoming conceited. Very rarely do you hear these scriptures shared that I'm going to share from 2 Corinthians chapter 11, verses 16 through 18. But in chapter 11, the chapter preceding this chapter, Paul acted defensively and he boasted. There were false apostles that had arisen among the church. They boasted of themselves. Their boasting led people astray. Paul, I'm sure, was frustrated by this. Paul was angered by this. While they were accepting the super apostles, as they were called, they were rejecting the apostle Paul. And so in the moment, he acted defensively. And in the moment, he boasted. I'll just share 3 of the verses. I repeat, let no one think me foolish, but even if you do, accept me as a fool so that I too may boast a little. What I'm saying with this boastful confidence, I say not as the Lord would, but as a fool, since many boast according to the flesh, I too will boast. I know this is difficult to see, but the Apostle Paul made those statements. The Holy Spirit allowed them to be written in the Bible. And they serve as a reminder for all of us that pride is a toxic poison in the life of any believer. God resists the proud, but gives grace to the humble. You are in need of the grace of God. If you desire to receive the grace of God, then the rightful position is a place of humility. And the Bible says, don't be fooled. The one that thinks they stand, they need to be aware that they'll fall. Pride is a toxic poison. A conceited Paul wouldn't be a useful Paul. A humble Paul would be a Paul that God could use. And God had work for Paul to do. God had words for Paul to write. And God had a world for Paul to reach with the gospel. That was the purpose of the thorn. It wasn't wasted pain. It wasn't the punishment of God, but it was the protection of God. Maybe that's why Paul described it as if it were a gift. Listen to his language in the text. It was given to me. Why would you talk about a thorn like that? I mean, maybe it was imposed on me, or it was forced on me, or against my will, it was placed on me. That wasn't Paul's language. He said it was given to me. There was no, God, how could you allow this to happen? How could you treat me like this? There was no, after all I've done for you. There was no, if you treat me like this, no, I will never serve you. No, instead, Paul talked about the thorn, experiencing the pain, the ongoing pain of the thorn, and he said, it was given to me. Sent by Satan, given by God. It was given to me. Why? So that I wouldn't become conceited. Paul was saying, this thorn has a purpose. Are you listening, church? God has humbled me. You see, Paul had experienced the supernatural, and that experience came with both a responsibility and at a price. Paul was allowed to see supernatural things so wonderful that it would have been Paul's fleshly inclination to say, notice me, admire me, be amazed by all that I tell you about me. But notice in the chapter, Paul said nothing about the revelations. Instead, he had a very public discussion about something as private as weakness. That would only happen as the result of a thorn. A little while back, I read what percentage of the average American's conversation is about themselves. And come to find out, almost the entirety of American conversations are people talking about themselves. We're not even great listeners, because while people are telling us about them, it's making us think of all of the things we need to tell them about us. This is our fleshly nature. This was even true in the life of Paul. And so it would have been Paul's fleshly desire to defend himself before these people by highlighting all of the things that God had privileged him to experience. And God said, no, Paul, if you talk about that in the way that your flesh would lead you to talk about that, you're going to forfeit what I long to do in your life. Paul said, there was given to me a thorn so that I wouldn't become conceited. And so Paul, he talked about his weakness. That's what the thorn accomplished. And this wasn't Paul exercising a greater degree of restraint. Don't listen to Paul in 2 Corinthians chapter 12 and think, wow, an apostle is talking about his weakness. No, listen to Paul in 2 Corinthians chapter 12. And realize that we serve a God who can work all things together for the good of those who are called according to his purpose, even a thorn. Now, the question everybody loves to ask is, what was the thorn? Why is it we care more about what the Bible doesn't say than what the Bible does say? Amen. You wouldn't believe some of the questions people have asked me. Did Adam and Eve have a belly button? I don't know. The last time I saw them, the fig leaves were covering. I don't know. How about this question? Pastor, if I'm pregnant now and Jesus returns, does that mean I'm going to be pregnant for all eternity? I mean, I've been asked so many questions. How old is God? When is God's birthday? I mean, I've been asked all kinds of questions. And a lot of people have asked this question, what was the thorn? Was it physical? Was it relational? Was it spiritual? And the answer is, I can say one thing with certainty. I don't know. There are people who try to put verses together and build a case, and some of that may hold some credibility, but we don't know. I believe The thorn was so intense that it was physical. I believe it was relational. And we know by Paul's own confession that it was spiritual. But we don't know what it was. Do you know why we don't know? Paul intentionally didn't tell us. He kept those details from us. What the thorn was apparently wasn't as important as what the thorn accomplished. Which means you don't have to talk to everybody about the thorn that God places in your life. It is no one's business for you. You don't owe them the details of your life. But what you can do is talk about what the thorn accomplishes in your life so that God receives the glory even from the pain. This was Paul's only description of this thorn. Chapter 12, verse 7. A messenger of Satan to harass me. What was the thorn? A messenger of Satan sent to harass him. The word messenger means angel. The word harass is interpreted buffet or torment. So to be hit in the face over and over and over again. So this is what we do know about the thorn. Paul was saying, in the same way they buffeted Jesus when they beat him beyond recognition, this messenger of Satan, this angel of Satan beats me black and blue. It never stops beating me down. And then he repeats it again to keep me from becoming conceited. I don't want to talk so much about the thorn, but I do want to talk about the purpose of the thorn. Paul's response to his torment was the natural response. Verse 8, 3 times I pleaded with the Lord about this, that it should leave me. What did Paul do? He prayed about it. Of course he prayed over his pain. His prayers had resulted in other people being healed. His prayers had been effective for others. His prayers had led to the healing of a crippled. He raised Eutychus from the dead. His prayers were effective for Publius' father. And then while on that island, many of the sick people came to Paul. He prayed for them and they were healed. Paul was accustomed to miracles. The supernatural was a common occurrence in his daily life. So sure, he would pray. But after praying 3 times, the one who had performed miracles for others had to accept that there was going to be no miracle for him. That would have been difficult to accept. How many of you ever get frustrated because your prayers aren't answered? You feel like they're not answered and you get frustrated. I think that's common. Imagine this. Your prayers had resulted in the healing and the miracle of others, but your prayers were ineffective for you. But there's one thing that helped Paul work through this. I'm confident in this, and it's that even in this pain, even in Paul's prayers not being answered in the way that he was praying, God wasn't silent. Let's read chapter 12, verses 9 and 10. But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Paul says, therefore, or because of that, I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me. For the sake of Christ, then, I'm content with weakness, insults, hardships, persecutions, and calamities. For when I am weak, then I am what? Strong. If all Jesus had said was, my grace is sufficient for you, Well, there would have been reason for Paul to have celebrated, because we all know to celebrate the sufficiency of the grace of God. His grace is sufficient for salvation, Ephesians chapter 1, verse 7, in whom we have redemption through his blood, the forgiveness of sins, our trespasses, according to the riches of his grace. Ephesians chapter 2, verse 8, for by grace you have been saved through faith. This is not of your own doing. It is the gift of God. We celebrate the sufficiency of God's grace in salvation. We celebrate the sufficiency of God's grace in that it sustains us. Hebrews chapter 4, verse 16. Let us then with confidence draw near to the throne of grace that we may receive mercy and find grace to help in our time of need. 2 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 8. And God is able to make all grace about doing to you, so that having all sufficiency in all things at all times, you may abound to every good work. If all God had said was, my grace is sufficient for you, then Paul would have had reason to have started the celebration. God's going to give me grace. In the same way grace saved me, in the same way grace has sustained me, God is going to give me grace. This is going to be okay. God is going to meet my need. Maybe there's hope that my prayer is going to be answered. But 2 Corinthians chapter 12 wasn't Jesus talking to Paul about salvation. And he wasn't talking to Paul about supplying his exterior needs. He was having a difficult conversation with Paul about suffering. If all he would have said was, my grace is sufficient, Paul would have gladly celebrated the sufficiency of grace that would alleviate his pain. But that wasn't all Jesus said. He went on to say, my strength is made perfect in your weakness. Instead of Jesus saying to him, at this moment when he couldn't have possibly felt more broken or more beaten down, I'm not going to answer your prayer by taking away your thorn. You're not going to experience relief from the impalement that is tormenting you. That's what Paul had prayed. That's what he'd asked for. Remove this. But notice back in the text, the word following his prayer is a period, and then there's a conjunction. But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you. And the moment Paul heard the promise of sufficient grace, he knew then the pain wasn't going away. He asked for a pardon, but he got a promise. He prayed for healing, but he received a word. A promise that grace would exceed the pain. That grace would go beyond the torment. Please hear this, that the intensity of Paul's suffering would never rival or surpass the intensity of God's grace. My grace is sufficient for you. My strength is made perfect in weakness. And so this is my question today, and I'm finished. Are you willing to believe that his grace is sufficient for the things that he doesn't take away? Are you willing to believe that a weaker you in the hands of God results in a stronger you by his power? That's the promise. the healing didn't come. And there are times in our lives when the healing won't come. There's times in our life when our loved one won't recover, when our marriage won't be fixed, when our humiliation is not erased, when our pain doesn't diminish. Paul was praying, give me my strength back. And Jesus responded, I can't answer that prayer. I can't give you what you want, because it's only when you are emptied of your strength that you can truly experience my strength. And that goes completely against our American mindset. As a matter of fact, even most of our prayers are, God, give me the strength to. God, make me strong enough to. God, make sure my family stays healthy. Make sure my family stays strong. Give them the strength to. When was the last time any of us prayed? God, I wish you would take away the thorn. But if you can use my weakness for a divine purpose, for a purpose greater than me, then I embrace the thorn. Because there is a power greater than what we can produce. There's a power greater than we can manufacture. It's called in this verse, my strength. And it's Jesus saying that. And Paul believed that promise. And so Paul said, if it's weakness that's going to give me this, my strength that comes from you, then I'm going to believe the promise and I'm going to embrace the weakness. I want to ask you today, do you believe that promise? Do you believe his grace is sufficient? Do you believe that his strength can be made perfect in your weakness? When life's not good, do you believe it? When sin seems to be prevailing, when that addiction seems to be beating you down, when the pain of the thorn won't go away, do you believe his grace is sufficient and his strength is made perfect in weakness? That is the promise. Let's stand, let's sing this together.